Hi, everyone, and welcome to Boston Balling. I'm your host, Gabby Hurlbut. We were just talking off air before we started about how everything seems to be going back to normal finally. People are out and about doing things and getting together with friends and family, and we love to see it. And it's just great. And so I hope everybody's having a good start to the week and everybody had a good weekend. I know here the weather was beautiful over the weekend, so I hope people were able to get outside and do things and just spend some time with people. A lot's going on in the sports world right now too, so it's definitely a very exciting time. Being a Boston sports fan, I know it's a fun time for me, and there's a lot that is going on. So we'll just see what happens. And I'm pleased to introduce my guest that I have with me today. She's a very well-known Boston sports person, does a very good job covering the Celtics game to game. Abby Chin, how are you doing?
I'm well. Thanks, Gabby, for having me.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's I'm really excited to have you with me today, and I know people are excited about this episode as well. So I appreciate you joining me. And before we kind of get into a lot of what we're going to talk about, can you just give people a brief overview about how you started working in sports and how you got to where you are now?
I grew up playing sports, loving sports. I was actually in Denver, Colorado, though, of all places. And my sister, I played soccer, ran track. My sister loved softball. And so we just happened to be in Denver, the inaugural season for the Colorado Rockies. And we went to a bunch of games that season, and it was just such a cool scene, something really fun to be a part of. And I think that kind of sparked my passion and love for sports outside of just playing them and being part of a team, which I really appreciate. And then I went to school for broadcasting. And when I got to college, I took a sports broadcasting class. And that's when I realized that you could just do sports, which I thought was amazing. So I did decide to try and focus on that. And I had submitted a resume to ESPN for their internship program 2 years prior. And just as I was graduating, they called and said they are looking for diverse candidates and they had a position available and if I'd like to interview for it. And I said, yes, I'll be there tomorrow, whatever you need. It was in Connecticut. I was in Colorado, whatever. I'm like, I will drop everything, whatever you need, I will be there. And so I was lucky enough to get that position. And I didn't realize it was a production assistant. It was actually at ESPN Classic. And I didn't realize how good I had it at the time because I didn't know. But I worked 9 to 5 Monday through Friday, which in sports and broadcasting in general, that just does not happen. But it was such a fun time for me because everyone around me was kind of at the same age, going through the same things. All of the production assistants were just out of college and had moved to a new place. But the great part about ESPN, and I eventually moved to remote production and traveled with like Monday Night Football and X Games. And I saw what was possible when you had unlimited resources, which was incredible. You know, Monday Night Football, they have 9 trucks or however many it is and 45 cameras for one game around the football field. And that was incredible. And so I was there for 3 years and I figured out or realized that if I wanted to try to go on air, I needed to do it as soon as possible. So it's funny, my tape coming out of college was terrible. I think I had like one stand up from the airport that said no one would talk to us here. And I did a bunch of internships in college. I just was very bad about pushing for myself, advocating for myself, and asking for opportunities to shoot something. And because Denver's a really cool town in that the sports were huge. They had the big 4. And so I got to cover, the Nuggets and for the local radio station. And I was in the locker room. I was in the scrums. I could ask questions if I wanted to. I just never, took that next step to ask to be able to do some stand-ups or get my tape. So bottom line, my tape out of college was terrible. No one called. I sent out a bunch. No one called. Which is why I was so excited to get the call from ESPN. But once I got there and after a few years, I had met some people. So I put a different tape together with a photographer and an editor who I had met there. And the only station that called was in Montgomery, Alabama. And it was another one that was like, yep, if you'll have me, I'll be there. Let me know, whatever it is. And it was a part-time sports reporter job. And my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, he actually had a brother who lives in Birmingham, which was like a coincidence. So, I was driving 80 miles for this part-time job that I was making $9.50 an hour at, and I got laid off. So, 6 months in, but a sports director at a station in Birmingham, Alabama, had seen me at a Alabama football press conference and saw how hard I worked, saw that I could ask questions and could ask good questions, and was able to get the job done. And so he took a chance on me, and I got to Birmingham, Alabama, because of that. And then I went from there to Portland, Oregon, and that's where I got into the NBA. In Portland, the Blazers are the only pro game in town. They now have the Timbers for soccer, but that wasn't there when I was there at first. And so, if you were going to do sports in Portland, you had to cover the Blazers. And so that's how I got in the NBA, and that's how Boston spotted me. And that's how I got here. And I just completed my 8th season covering the Celtics. So it's been a ride.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people's stories about just going from place to place and bouncing around from station to station and just going wherever. And I feel like that's just what people have to be willing to do, especially at first, and just take that job wherever that may be, even if it's not in the most desirable location to start off with. It's only going to be the experience to help get your foot in the door at other places. And it sounds like you just did what you needed to do. And it seems like you really enjoy what you're doing. And I know I can tell from when I watch you cover the Celtics, that it's just something that genuinely makes you happy.
Thank you for saying that. I hope so. I mean, it's, the best job in the world. Who wouldn't want a job? Before this year, before COVID, like you were talking about, I got to travel with the team. I was there for every game. This last season, I was in studio, which was a whole other challenge, and it was really fun, but I didn't get to go to the arena. So it was the first time that I wasn't inside TD Garden for the playoffs, and it was heart-wrenching to not be there. And to be in that first game back with the fans inside the arena, it killed me to not be there. But hopefully, like you said, things will slowly and actually get back to normal for next season.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping too. And I'm sure it was probably just a different experience not being able to be there and at the Garden and covering games from there, and just the adjustment that everybody had to go through this past year and everything and all the challenges that came with it. But it's awesome that you're still, you're still doing it. And hopefully, like you said, next year, everything will just feel normal again, and you'll be able to go back to doing all of that and feeling more connected to the team and everything else.
I know, I do. I hope that Zoom interview sessions are a thing of the past, but
yeah,
I do. It was nice. I wouldn't say nice, but it was good that we got the opportunity to cover the bubble as well. I think it gave us a little taste, and you could kind of see what was possible, what wasn't. And then we were able to build on that for this season.
Yeah, definitely. And the bubble obviously was so different. And I think coming into this season, we saw the challenges that teams faced with that transition of coming back out of the bubble, because they got used to that environment. And then I think they caused a lot of struggles, especially early on for a lot of teams, going back to actually playing real basketball outside of that bubble environment. And I think you could see it being a transition for everybody involved, like the players, the coaching staff, people that covered the teams. I think there was just kind of that little transition period because they got so used to the bubble.
No question. I mean, it was unprecedented, the bubble in itself, and the fact that the players and the coaches had to be away from their families. I mean, save for maybe a week at the end, but a week from their families for months on end. And then, and that's after the 4 months of stress that we all went through in the beginning of the pandemic, where no one knew what was going on, what was going to happen, just living in constant fear, living in lockdown. Yeah. And then after they get out of the bubble, you realize that this league needs to make money. And so they're going to bring them back as soon as possible. And it's a much shorter off season than anyone expected. Especially, I think, the bubble teams. And I really, like you said, it did affect the Celtics. I mean, they were they lost the most games due to COVID of any team in the league by far. And then the maintenance program and the strengthening program for Kemba Walker's knee that they had on was put in place thinking that they had at least a month more of time before the regular season started, before training camp started. And so all of that I think certainly added to the Celtics roller coaster season and everything that they went through, the ups and downs and starts and stops, and just not being able to find any consistency because there wasn't any across the roster.
Yeah, and I think you summed up pretty well how I even felt about this season as a whole for them. The inconsistency and just the frustration that I think came with a lot of this season. And, going into the season, I was excited. I was like, yeah, we'll finally have real basketball again. This is going to be good. Like, no more bubble. Like, this is just going to it's going to start to feel a little bit more normal. And I was really excited to have the season happen. And then there was so many frustrations that came with this season, and injuries played a part and COVID played a part. And I think just a lot of holes in the roster that we really started to see come out as the season progressed, and just defensive struggles and just a lot of different issues, I think, that the team faced this year that, I think fans might have had a lot higher of expectations for the team this year than what we actually saw happen as the season progressed.
There's no question. And I mean, the reality is that Boston, you play for championships when it comes to Boston. And the Celtics had made it to the Eastern Conference Finals in 3 of the last 4 years. And yes, there had been a huge talent drain when you look at Kyrie Irving and Al Horford and then Gordon Hayward. But there was a huge level of excitement because, they got to the Eastern Conference Finals inside the bubble with a Gordon Hayward that was, with an ankle injury that was 50%. And then also afterwards, we found out that Kemba Walker was also dealing with a lot of discomfort in that knee. So you thought with the ascension of Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and then a healthy Kemba Walker, that had to be, the expectations were high. That is a team that you would expect to go far in the playoffs. The problem also, along with that talent drain, is that the teams around them are loading up. When you look at the Nets and the Sixers, and then even the Bucks, who we see now how much they're struggling against the Nets. How good does Jayson Tatum look right now? The fact that he was put these Celtics on his back against that Nets team. And granted, the big 3, when the Celtics faced them in that first round, had played all of 8 games together. And so now they have a few more under their belt. But I think that expectations were higher than was reasonable when we look back at this team, when we know what we know. And I think, Gabby, honestly, and I've been saying this a lot lately, what I didn't understand is what it takes to be a leader in this league and to have a franchise placed onto your shoulders. And I think that we expected a lot out of Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who we forget are, in Jaylen's case, he's 24 years old. Jayson is 23 years old. And we've seen them succeed on the biggest stages and really step up in so many ways, but they haven't been in this situation before. And they haven't had the support that they had in the past, whether it be veterans like Al Horford and also Kyrie Irving and a Gordon Hayward. And so I think that I didn't comprehend how big of a step that was going to be for them. And I think they did as well. And so I just think it was a lot. And then you throw in the shortened off season and all of the injuries and all of that. And it was just so much, as Brad Stevens put it, it was just such a burden on both of them. And we saw it was too much.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, as soon as the news broke that Jaylen Brown was going to be missing the entire postseason, that's when I kind of knew that there wasn't really much that this team was going to be able to do. And Jayson Tatum, there's so much that I can say about that kid, and I can't wait to see him develop and continue to just shine, because he is such a really, really good young talent to have on this team. And I hope that he stays here. And that they keep him, and that they can try to build a team around him and Jaylen Brown, because having those two at the age they're at now, watching them continue to develop, I hope that continues in Boston for a long time, because I think that could be something really special, and that duo together could be something that for years to come now is one of those duos that we look at and people don't want to play against. And I think it's an experience thing, like you said, and I think it's just hard when, Jaylen Brown is down, who is obviously a key component to this team, and you're facing Brooklyn in the first round of the playoffs. obviously not ideal. And I think I am proud of the way that they just kept competing in each of these games against Brooklyn, even though he wasn't there, and just the team that is. And looking back on even that game last night between Milwaukee and Brooklyn and just how not competitive that game was, I'm sitting here and I'm like, wow, at least the Celtics kept it competitive and didn't just get blown out and the game wasn't over in the first quarter every game, and I think that we can at least take that from this postseason run, is that, there were just so many factors going into it that we knew that this wasn't going to be their year. And I think that now that we are starting to see significant changes within the organization, which I'm going to touch on in a minute, I think there's a lot of opportunity and room for growth this offseason. And I think this offseason is going to be really important to see what direction this team wants to go in. And so, I mean, for those of you that don't really know or haven't been keeping up with it, it was just announced last week that Danny Ainge is retiring from his position within the Boston Celtics, and Brad Stevens is now taking over as the new president of basketball operations, which I don't know how you ever reacted to that news originally. The Danny Ainge part didn't surprise me as much, but the fact that they said that Brad was taking over surprised me a little bit more.
I do. It was shocking. I actually was just happened to be getting coffee that morning with Kyle Draper, who used to be at our station and is now in Sacramento. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, Abby, what is going on?" And I was like, "What?" And we both looked at our phones and we were like, "Oh my gosh, what is going on?" As the Woj bombs just kept dropping. And everyone I texted was like, "Did you know this was happening? Did you know anything about this?" And I think that's the most amazing thing to me about this Celtics organization is like the big secrets, the really big ones. You do not know what's happening until it is done. And like, I go back to when they hired Brad Stevens in 2013, and that news was broken in a press release from the team. And so, and this move was clearly had been in the works for, it sounds like months after hearing from both Danny Ainge and Brad Stevens. And the fact that they just sat on it, I texted Brad that I was like, I don't know how you guys keep these life-changing secrets so quiet, because I could not, I cannot sit on something like that. Like with my pregnancy news or something, I told everyone and anyone before the 12-week mark. I was just like, this is happening. I don't know how to process it. So I find that amazing. And it is surprising to me. You're right. There were like hints. There had been reports, some talks that Danny may be considering stepping down, maybe thinking about that. And the reality is the health stuff is real. He has had, 2 events with his heart, and they are legitimate factors, I think, in all of this. And I do believe that if Danny does get another job with a different organization, it will be more of an advisory role. It will not be as a general manager who is that hands-on, that day-to-day, traveling as much as he did. And the Brad Stevens thing, I think, was really what struck me in his press conference, was that he's excited for a new voice to get into the locker room. And I do think that is Brad took a lot of heat this season for his guys not, and this was the regular season more so than that playoff series, because I agree with you. I feel like they fought throughout that series against the Nets. Even to the last game, they were in it and doing everything that they could. But that was not necessarily the case in the regular season and through those 72 games. And Brad took a lot of heat for that. And I do think that there is something to be said for, this was his 8th year. I came in the same year that Brad did, and that was his 8th season. Jayson and Jaylen have grown so much, as you mentioned, in that time. But maybe it is time for a new voice to come in and a new perspective, someone else to deliver the messages in a different way. And so I think that was a great opportunity. This opens up that opportunity for this team and the players that are on it, because let's be clear, like you said, Jaylen and Jayson are not going anywhere. Those guys will not be traded. It makes absolutely no sense to trade them, even for, you could argue a Bradley Beal maybe, but I'm not sure that makes you better for the long term, which is how long you have both of those guys signed. And so I do think it's interesting. I think the things that I know about Brad is that he will absolutely go through the process of looking for this next head coach. he's not just going to go off on a whim. He is going to do the research. He loves data points. He's going to get all of the information that he can, gather all of the information he can to make the best decision. And who better to make that decision than someone who knows all of those players, all of those guys in and out, has worked with them every single day, and also knows the league and has studied every team across the league for the last 8 years. And so I really am interested to see where the coaching search ends up. And I am interested to see Brad in this role because, like you said, this is a pivotal summer for this team. We know that the Celtics, banner number 18 is the goal. Anything short is a failure. And so the roster as it's constructed right now clearly is not good enough to compete in the East, let alone for an NBA championship. And so, yes, there absolutely needs to be changes.
Yeah, and I think what you touched on before about Brad knowing the team, I've said that to a lot of people when having this conversation, when the news broke about him taking over that role. I said, this is somebody that was with these guys every day. And so if anybody knows what this team needs, it is him, and this is somebody that could come into this role and has had a connection with these players. And so this could actually be a really good thing. And I think the idea of change is necessary at this point because maybe just like it needs to be somebody that can deliver messages differently and get the players more motivated. Because I do feel like there were games that they came out and they were not really showing that they were motivated or didn't seem to have the heart to win every game that they came out into. And so I think that might have been an issue as well. So having somebody come in that maybe could just take a different approach with the players could actually maybe turn things around for them. And just Brad, I do agree with you. I think he's going to take his time with the search. I've seen a lot of names thrown out there, like Jason Kidd's name and Kara Lawson and people like that. I think Chauncey Billups I saw at one point. But I think there's just going to be a lot of names tossed around. But it's hard to really know where he's going to land with that because I do trust that he's going to take his time and he's really going to pick somebody that he feels can be the best voice for this locker room and that leader that can kind of help this team to just grow more. And I think also some of the moves that he makes in terms of the roster are going to be interesting to see because I think it would be beneficial to get more veteran leadership on this team too because I think that that's something that they lack a little bit compared to other teams. And I think that we saw that when you look at other teams in the East, a lot of those teams have those veteran players that are leaders. And so I think we need more of that because this Celtics team is young and we've seen them get to the Eastern Conference Finals and they just can't get over that hump. And they just never have enough to be able to really complete that run and get that championship. And so I think getting some veteran leadership here is going to be beneficial, but it's going to be interesting to see the types of moves that he makes in the off season, because then we'll know, I think, what direction the team is going in, because it seems like they haven't really picked a direction, whether they want to do a rebuild or they want to go and give up some of their young talent to win a championship right now. It just seems like they're kind of in the middle right now. And I think that it's going to be interesting to see what they do to go about that this offseason.
Absolutely. I think that in the middle, they call it the purgatory in the NBA. That is the absolute worst place to be, where you just keep barely making the playoffs every year. But you're right. Brad Stevens has a lot of big decisions to make. And I think Danny tried this offseason to bring in some of that veteran leadership when you look at Tristan Thompson and Jeff Teague. And Tristan Thompson talked all year about stepping up in the playoffs, and I feel like he did, especially in game 2 of that series against the Nets and then in game 3 as well. And so I think they tried, but you're right. It was the depth was an issue all season long, especially when they're dealing with the number of injuries that they had. And so there are going to be some tough decisions to make, especially when you look at the back end of the roster. And like you said, I really am interested to see the way that Brad goes. I think Brad has been very involved in the draft process when he can. You know, as soon as the season ends, he is in the gym. He is working guys out. He is trying to. I mean, we know he watches as much film as anyone. So I think that part he feels comfortable in. To me, it's going to be, you know, the trades and the wheeling and dealing and the negotiations and all of that. I really am interested to see. But I do like what you said, and that I think it's going to be telling what the first few moves are, because that's where he sees were the biggest priorities for him and what he sees needed to be changed. And so I'm just really curious of how this offseason is going to play out after. And while I'm not sure that, I don't know how long he's going to take in this coaching search. I think he's going to be thorough. I think that no one knows the coaching world and who's available and who the type of person that he would gravitate towards more than him, because he works so closely with so many different coaches and has clinics in the off season and has been really involved in that world. And so I think he is going to do his due diligence and do everything he can. But I'm not sure that it's something. I do think that they would like to have some answers and start to have some things in place by the draft, you know, by July 29th. And so the window is not open that wide. And I know that Danny in this transition is looking to get out on the golf course more sooner rather than later. So,
yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. I am excited to see who he brings in, though, because I do trust that he will bring in somebody that he knows will be able to connect with his players. And it just helps that he's been working with this team for so long. And I think having somebody that he can bring in, I will trust that whoever he does pick is somebody that hopefully will be a good fit for this team. And obviously we're not going to know that for sure until they actually start working with the team. But I do trust Brad's judgment and his ability to be able to bring in somebody that can work with this team. And I think in terms of the offseason moves, I mean, yeah, there's a lot that he can do. And it's going to be just because now the team is at the point where people are like, okay, well, we've had the ability to go all the way for so long. We just don't have enough pieces. And you look at teams like Brooklyn, who gave up a lot to create that big three to go all the way. And now they're looking like a team that really probably could do that. So you look at a team like that, and we knew as soon as they made those moves for James Harden, we knew exactly that they were like, yeah, we're in a win now mentality. We can't, we're done trying to just be like barely scraping by and maybe making the playoffs. Like, we want to win a championship right now. And I think that they made some noise, but when they did get James Harden, everybody was like, okay, well, is there a team that really can be Brooklyn? And we saw Philly make a lot of solid moves too, because that's another team that's been a disappointment in the postseason recently. They just couldn't figure it out in the playoffs, and now they're playing really well too. So I think it's going to be really telling in this offseason what Brad does. I love that they brought Evan Fournier in. I think he's somebody that really made a difference when he was here. And I'm hoping that they re-sign him, because he's somebody that I could see really being able to contribute if they do want to go for a championship run. And so I'm hoping that re-signing him is something that they end up prioritizing in this offseason.
My appreciation for Evan Fournier as a player grew every game. And he also got hit by COVID. I mean, 2 weeks after he arrived, and before he went down with that, had hit 10 of his last 11 threes. And it was so exciting, and couldn't wait to see what he would look like alongside Jaylen and Jayson and making this push. The thing that I am not sure about, and it's unfortunate because they would have faced Brooklyn in the first round no matter what, right? Is what the healthy starting five of the Celtics, if you had Kemba, Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, Jayson Tatum, and then Rob Williams, a healthy Rob Williams starting. And then you have Tristan Thompson coming off the bench. You have Evan Fournier coming off the bench. And then you can kind of go where you want to from there with a Romeo Langford or a Peyton Pritchard. But that was a solid playoff rotation. And it's something that we didn't see what they were actually capable of because of injuries. And I think when you look back on the most recent seasons and Brad's time in particular, like those injuries, that injury luck is something that they just have not had. When you look at in the bubble with Gordon Hayward, who knows what they could have done with a healthy Gordon Hayward and a healthy Kemba Walker. And I think that's what made the bubble and that run so frustrating and discouraging, is because it felt like that was the time, that was the moment that they really could have found a way to get to the finals and give the Lakers a run for their money, because they didn't have their stuff together yet either. But I don't think that it's fair to compare it to Brooklyn. I mean, the congregation of superstars, they are the ones who orchestrated that. Kyrie Irving, obviously, leaving the Celtics the way that they did. It's just it's so crazy to think that it was 7 years ago. Well, it was 8 years ago that the trade from this summer that the blockbuster deal with the Nets went down, and where the Nets went from there, and how they have built themselves back up. And they did, you're right. They had a ton of talent that they were able to trade for important pieces, but and they did take risks on, I mean, I don't know how much signing Kevin Durant, even though he had a torn Achilles, how much of a risk that is. But they signed Kyrie and Kevin through free agency. That was not, those, I think that those are moves that anyone would make. And they were, what I am impressed by Brooklyn is how they did in their rebuild and how they were able to take chances on pieces that maybe didn't work somewhere else and able to come and bring them, develop them, fit them into their system, turn them into an asset, and then be able to trade those pieces on for higher draft picks. And so I think that's what's impressed me. They put themselves in position to be able to make the move for James Harden when that did become available. And so I think the Celtics, and that's, to me, I think one of the frustrating things about all of this, since all this change has come about, is that when you look at it big picture, it doesn't look good, right? The Celtics this season not living up to expectations, the way it all went down. But when you look at it, and each move and each season and each decision that was made, they make sense at the time. You trade for Kyrie Irving 100 times out of 100, and then you just deal with what comes of it. You do not offer Al Horford $117 million for the next 4 years. You just don't do that. You let him go to Philly. And so while that has created this talent drain, and when you look back on it, this season was not fun, but in a vacuum, every single decision makes sense. And so I don't know how things would have gone differently. And it's just such a Pandora's box to open.
Yeah. And, you really do have to wonder if everybody was healthy all season, how things would have gone. And because on paper, with everybody healthy, this is a very talented roster. And it's just unfortunate just how much they just kept getting plagued with certain things this year. And it's, I mean, the
literally
Lakers,
plagued, like the COVID is a plague. They were literally plagued with so many different things.
Yeah. And just looking back on all of that, and I mean, I do think obviously there were games that we could look back on and say, yeah, they could have played better in these games. And there were certain games that they should have won, but that just comes with the territory, and I think looking back on everything, I mean, the Lakers were in the same position with LeBron, and AD weren't fully healthy all season either. And that's a completely different Lakers team without one of those two playing. And it's obvious. And even in their playoff run this year, they didn't have Anthony Davis for a lot of those games either. And so it's just, when you look back on teams like that when fully healthy, it could be a lot better. I think it's hard for me to look back on this and not say that the Celtics would have had a better result at the end of the regular season had they been healthy all year. I just am having trouble thinking that they would be exactly where they were had they had a full season with everybody healthy and just not dealing with injuries all season, literally all season long. And if COVID wasn't a factor, and just thinking about this roster makeup, I just don't think that they would have been as low as the 7 seed. I do think that they could have finished more higher up in the Eastern Conference had they been healthy all year. Because I think talent-wise, they had the ability to finish higher up than that if they had been fully healthy.
Which, you're right. I mean, that was indicative of this season. They had that stretch over the last handful of games where they had a home series against Miami, where if they had just won those 2 games, if they could have, you're right, vaulted themselves up into the 4 or 5 spot. But it didn't happen. And then, of course, the Jaylen Brown injury and the news, you're right, that just sealed the fate for this season. Yeah. But I give the Celtics credit for making changes, not being satisfied. Like I said, if you look at every move, everything that's happened, one as an individual thing, you understand it all makes sense. It's all reasonable, but that's not enough. They're not satisfied. And so this is a huge shakeup for the Celtics in that front office. And I am really, really interested to see what's going to happen. I wish I knew. I wish I could tell. I wish I had more information. Yeah. I just, and that's, I think, one of the hardest parts in this job is that we're so reactionary. We can only really talk about what has happened, and it's so hard to predict what is going to happen.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people gave Kemba a hard time this season too. I mean, I just looking on Twitter and everything else, and just other fans.
It's very negative. It's a very negative place, Twitter.
Yeah, it is. And people were so hard on Kemba this year, like, he's underperforming and this is not the Kemba Walker that we need to have here and everything like that. And I think what I will say about that is, like, he hasn't been fully healthy since he's been here. You know what I mean? I mean, he was injured last season, majorly injured, and then he comes back partway through the season this year and he's injured and then gets injured again. You know what I mean? And so we haven't really gotten a full healthy Kemba Walker yet. And so I think people need to kind of pump the brakes on that one a little and just say, like, yeah, I mean, really when he's been here, he hasn't really been 100%. So we know that. Yeah, I mean, the Kemba Walker that everybody's hoping and waiting for is, I mean, he hasn't been fully healthy. So I think people need to just wait on that one because people are like, we should trade Kemba. And I think that would be premature to right now say we need to trade Kemba Walker when he's been injured more than he's been healthy here.
The problem there is, right, you'd be trading low on Kemba. And so then are you willing to give up something else to entice a team to take him? But it's also matching salaries. He is currently the highest paid player on the Boston Celtics. And so you have to find a way to make that work. And so I think that even though Danny is no longer in that position, Brad will not be afraid to make the moves that he views necessary to make the team better. And everyone said, for Danny, everyone's on the table, everyone's on the block. And I think that will be true of Brad as well. I think that he is underrated competitive. Like, a lot of people think just because he's not yelling and screaming in the huddle that he doesn't care. But if you listen to Danny, if you listen to everyone, he cares more than anyone. And the losing gets to him. And so I do think he's going to do whatever it takes to build this into a championship franchise and won't be afraid to make the tough decisions.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be sad. It could be really sad to see them part ways with certain players, but I do think that, nobody's safe. I mean, if he has to make major moves and part ways with some serious talent here just to bring back players that could help even more, I do think we will see that. And I don't think
to be clear, Gabby, though, I am not saying Jaylen and Jayson. Outside of those two.
If they do that, I don't know what I would do. It would be really, really hard to watch the Celtics and take them seriously if they got rid of Jayson Tatum or Jaylen Brown. It would be hard to take this team seriously, especially in the future, because those are guys that in the future are going to help you longer term. So you need to hang on to those two. Those two players should be the only ones right now, I think, though, that you can sit there and say, yeah, these two are a lock to stay here. Like, you do not make a trade that involves getting rid of one of those two because you need to hang on to those two guys. But anybody else on the roster that I look at right now, as much as I like Evan Fournier and as much as, I'm a big fan of Marcus Smart too. And certain players, I think that, there is no guarantee that we could see any of those guys on the roster next year. If he feels like he sees an opening where he can come and get better talent back that can just help them win a championship now. And I think when you look at how the roster is made up now, I could see him moving anybody. And I think people need to be prepared for that. And I definitely do not think this is going to be a quiet offseason. I think that we could see a lot happen because he knows that there's a lot that needs to be addressed, and he knows the holes that exist. And I think that's a good thing, because I think that there's a lot of potential for growth here. And I think anybody is kind of on the chopping block, and we could see anybody be moved besides those two, because those two, they pretty much are the future of the franchise right now. So
no question.
they just need to hang on to them. But anybody else, I think, could be a trade option, I think. And I think Brad will not be afraid to just pull the plug on anything and just be like, yeah, like, this is a move we have to make if we want to win a championship. And I think people need to just be ready for that and prepared for that.
Don't get me wrong, though, Gabby. If the day that Marcus Smart is no longer a Boston Celtic will be a sad, sad day in my
I know. I keep thinking about that too. And I'm like, because that is somebody that I seriously could see be moved, because he's somebody that if you put into a trade package, you probably could get a lot of, like, you could get something good back out of that, depending on what you give up with him. But he's definitely a player that I could actually see being moved, because there could be teams that could use somebody like him over there, and you could actually get good value in return for him. So it will be really sad to see him play for another team. But I do think that he's one of the biggest names that pops into my head, actually, as somebody that we could see be moved this offseason, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I'm in no way saying that I know anything or that any moves are on the horizon or starting any rumors, but it is, he has 1 year left on his contract. Where that number is something that could be used, easily moved. And he's extension eligible. So if you want to commit to Marcus, we could see that happen this summer. I don't think that that's how it will play out. Because like you said, he is one of the pieces that they do have that has value.
Yeah, it's just weird to think about how much different this roster could be come this upcoming season. And I mean, because there's just so much that they can do, and so we could actually see a lot of people be moved. And I think the chemistry factor is important as well. And I think that there were instances that we started to maybe see a lack of chemistry among everybody this year. And I think it's going to be interesting to see who they bring in, because obviously basketball, I mean, chemistry is a huge thing in that sport. And I think if you don't have players that can really mesh well together, then you're not going to be able to win anything. And I think that was one of the biggest concerns with Brooklyn when they did bring in James Harden, was how were those three players going to mesh and play together. And I think we're seeing, they're able to make it work. And I know that was a question. And I think that's something obviously that we need to keep in mind in the offseason too, is just making sure that whoever they bring in, especially in the coaching position, is able to just establish that chemistry. Because if the roster is new and you have a lot of new talent coming in, like, that's something that you're going to have somebody in that position that can help establish that early on too. So I think with everything that we're considering right now and all the changes that are going to be being made, I think it's going to be, it could be a challenge at the beginning with all of those changes. But I think that I trust Brad to make the right moves in order to put them in serious contention to compete with other teams in the Eastern Conference, because some of those teams are only getting better as well.
Gabby, I guess the question is, what is your definition of chemistry? Because I get into that debate a lot with Scal. This Celtics team this season, they all got along. I think they all really liked each other. They enjoyed each other. There was not drama in the locker room as far as we can tell. Obviously, everything was on Zoom, and so you couldn't necessarily see that. But all you heard from the players and Brad Stevens himself was just how together everyone was, that they were sticking together, that they did have each other's backs. And so the chemistry, you're right. What the most important chemistry is out on the court and how the pieces fit together. And to me, the issues weren't offensive. This season was about defense. And I think that's what was most disappointing for Brad. That's what he pointed to. That's what was, it felt like a lack of defensive effort. And that guys not focusing, dialing in on the game plan and being able to execute that. And so I think that defensively, that may be where the chemistry broke down, but it's also at that end of the floor, it's so much about effort and hustle and want to. And especially with this team, the way that they were trying to play defense, it was guarding your yard and taking pride on that end of the floor. And we didn't see that. And that's what was so disappointing. But to me, that's not necessarily a chemistry issue. And so I don't know where, where that line is. It's a tough balance for me because all of the changes that are going to come in, I do think that Jayson and Jaylen, their leadership styles, Jayson is a very much lead by example. Jaylen, a little bit more outspoken when it is cause for it. Whoever does come in is going to have to respect that and is going to know that. That's something that is well established. And so you're right. I'm curious to see how dynamics change. What changes are made and how it does affect the group as a whole. And the coach obviously is I think the biggest piece to that. And that will be the first domino to fall.
Yeah. And I mean, I never had any concerns about anything off the court with this group of players. I mean, you have a lot of just, the group that they had was just a lot of likable guys, I think. And there aren't really
what made it so hard, I think.
Yeah, there weren't necessarily like
guys,
players on this roster that you look at and are like, oh, this person could cause a lot of drama in the locker room. Like that didn't really exist. You don't really have players on this roster that you could really point to and say that. You know what I mean? They just didn't really have that. So I was never concerned about that. But when I was watching games, it was more that defensive effort. And I was like, who's motivating them to actually want to try on defense in this game? Because there doesn't really seem to be anybody that's taking on that role. And I think that was just a frustrating thing to watch because defense was really just what kept them out of so many games and just leaving people wide open and just a lack of effort and motivation on that end of the floor. And Brad knows that. I mean, it was addressed multiple times. And I think that's something that needs to be brought to attention in the offseason. I mean, that's the main issue that they had this season. I was not concerned about shooting. There was just an issue defensively, and I don't know where that was coming from, but it was pretty clear that game to game, they just could not figure out what they were doing defensively. And they just seemed lost defensively or just didn't want to be playing defense or just didn't have the desire to. And it's just hard to pinpoint exactly what it was. But to me, it came across as an effort thing. So I think that's going to be really important for them to address as well. But I mean, you're right with Jayson and Jaylen's leadership styles. And I think that's a good thing because I think having a mix of both of those types of leadership styles is important. And the fact that they're able to make it work with each other and they can go hand in hand with those leadership styles, I think that's what makes the two of them really, really special. And I think that's what makes them so successful on and off the court, just as teammates and as players, because you need to have a mix of those types of leadership styles there. And I think I think they really hit the jackpot with those two guys because this is something that could be really special going forward. And just the way that they are able to lead this team in completely different ways, but it just works for this roster,
Well, and credit to Danny Ainge for making those picks. I mean, not a lot of people saw Jaylen Brown at number 3 and then Danny trading out of the number 1 pick to feeling strong enough, and secure enough to know that he was still going to get Jayson Tatum at number 3. Right. You're right. All of that has played into it. And I think to me, that's what was so fun about the beginning of this season is seeing the leaps that both of those guys took coming out of the bubble. And then also the stories that we heard about how much they have grown to really respect and enjoy playing with each other. And so I think that you're right. That can only mean good things for this franchise going forward.
Yeah, I'm excited to just watch their careers play out here. And I'm just really looking forward to that. And I'm also just excited for the offseason in general. I'm just excited to see what they do and just to see what this roster looks like come this upcoming season. And I'm excited to just see who they bring in to coach the team, because I think this could very much be a good change for them. And I think that it's going to be fun to watch just the way that this team is made up this year. And I think that people are really looking forward to the possibilities that this team could do, because I mean, there's so much potential there. And I think if we look at, how the roster could be constructed maybe, and just the possibilities that come with it, I think this could be a really, really good change. And this could be the start of something really good. And so I think there's optimism, I will say, for this offseason. And I think there's more reason to be positive than not about just kind of this offseason and going forward and where this team could go from here.
Certainly, you have to be hopeful, especially when you do have the pillars in Jayson, Tatum, and Jaylen Brown, and that is going to be a constant with this team for the next handful of years. And then for me, I don't know if I am excited for this offseason. I'm excited to see what happens, but I just wish it hadn't come so soon. I'm used to covering this team that goes into the Eastern Conference Finals. It should be working for the next 2 or 3 weeks, at least over the next month. So I think that's the only disappointing part.
It is sad. It's tough watching games now, knowing that the Celtics are out of it, and that I just don't get nearly as excited for these playoff games anymore, because I don't have my team to root for anymore. So that part of it is sad. And like
I'm trying, Gabby, though. I tweeted last night, I'm jumping on the Suns bandwagon just because I feel like I'm
rooting for them too.
Yeah, I want a team to root for, and it's not going to be the Nets. It's not going to be anyone in the
No,
Eastern
it's definitely not going to be Brooklyn. And I like the Suns, and I think it'd be nice to see Chris Paul get a ring with them. So I think that that's one of the biggest things that I'm rooting for. And I mean, I love Devin Booker. I think he's such a fun player to watch, and he's been so good this postseason, especially so far. I think they're just an exciting team to watch, and I'm really happy that they eliminated the Lakers.
Right. I think that was a huge reason for me. And Devin Booker, I will never, obviously, ever forget him putting up 70 on the Celtics, and then his team celebrating like they won the game in the locker room afterwards. That was so strange, being in that hallway and hearing a party coming out of that locker room when they lost. But to me, that doesn't take away from the accomplishment of what he did. And you're right. He's a fun player to watch. He can score in so many different ways. And it's been really cool. And it was interesting because Aaron Baines was there, not this season, but the last one, and how much he raved about playing with Devin Booker, and how much Devin just cared about winning. And he was willing, while defense obviously isn't one of his strengths, he tries on that end of the floor and wants to learn and wants to be better in all facets of the game. And so I do respect Devin Booker, and I'm jumping on the Suns bandwagon. Officially.
Yeah, I'm rooting for them. And I mean, Milwaukee was the team that I was kind of rooting for in the Eastern Conference after the Celtics got eliminated, because I was like, I'm not rooting for Brooklyn, and I'm not rooting for Philly either. And I actually like Giannis as a player. So I was like, maybe Milwaukee will do it, but that's not looking good either. So I think I'm going to ride with the Suns as well, and just see where that goes. So that way, at least I have a team to root for the rest of the playoffs.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully. You hope.
Yeah. I know that we can only hope, but I really appreciate you joining me on the show. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. I know you have a really busy schedule and everything, so appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and I'm excited to see what happens this offseason and what the Celtics do.
Me too. Thank you for having me. This is fun. I love talking basketball.
Yeah, me too. It's so fun. And everybody, thanks again for always tuning in to Boston Balling. I really appreciate everybody's constant support. You know where to find the show. It's on all podcast streaming platforms. And so I hope everyone has a good rest of your week, and I'll talk to you next time.